Hey, I'm glad you're here. If you've been following along with the Deepening Place podcast, and if you have, thank you so much, you'll know that in the episode Baby Yoda, at the very end, Jai told the story about his birth and how he was welcomed into his family. And in the episode Everything We Need, Jai tells the story from about middle school through high school and even onward toward his career path. So Jai and I were talking, and I asked him if he would be willing to tell the middle part of the story, and he agreed to. So that's what this episode, Weird Wasteland, is about. And in this episode, Jai is vulnerable and open and discusses some things I think he may not have even considered himself before. So I'd like to thank Jai for this gift that he's given us, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, welcome to the Deepening Place. Hello, Jai.
Hey Angela, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm rested. I finally let my body do what it needs to do. So I feel pretty good besides the allergies.
Yeah, that's always a good feeling to get caught up on sleep.
It's like a different body, but it's my own and it's just refreshed. It's crazy how
Good.
different that is. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe you'll be set up for a good week now.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah. So I feel good about that.
I was thinking, we've had a couple of episodes where we've talked about part of your story. One was Baby Yoda, and then that one kind of, at the end of the episode, we kind of talked about what it was like for your family when you were born and how, they spoke the word into you. And you said that that was so powerful. It kind of set the course for your life in a way.
Hmm.
In our latest episode, you told the story about I was asking you about your kind of matrix moment, and you told the story about middle school and high school and going on to LSU and becoming an educator. But I feel like we missed an important piece.
So what
Like,
happened in between little toddler Jai and teenage Jai?
yeah, like, what happened between Baby Yoda and then your mom and sister being surprised you didn't become a drug dealer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love for you to fill us in on that little piece so we'll have the complete picture.
So I would say the first part is just family dynamics. When I was 7 years old, my mom was pregnant with my youngest brother, and so she just had less attention to spend, right? But shortly thereafter, my dad's struggles with the addiction really came to fruition when crack cocaine hit our neighborhood in New Orleans. Now, a lot of people tried it, what they don't know. It was common for people in my dad's generation smoke weed and do coke. It was very
Hmm.
common, as well known. But crack cocaine had such a heavy influence because it seemed like, the next thing to try. For my dad, it got him hooked. And so that was when I was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. At that point, life at home changed dramatically, seemingly almost overnight. I went from sitting at my desk doing homework just a year or two before, pretty regularly and routinely, with normal like kid kickbacks, to by the end of third grade, I was just pretty much on my own with school. It was totally, totally different, which is fine. It's a lot of kids experience it, but that was a change for me. That was my delta. And substituting school when I came home became things like my mom telling me about my dad going to rehab, her asking me very serious questions like where should we move and what kind of money we need, very extremely adult decisions that I was really not equipped to handle yet. And so that really shaped the next, third, probably all the way up to about freshman year in high school. So for probably about the next 6 years, I had this
Yeah.
massive disconnect with what I thought was childhood. It was
Mm.
mostly gone, not all gone. I was still a kid. I was going home and noticing all these different things now. I knew my dad was addicted. We kind of came up in school. We kind of saw it on the news. And so just to recap, I had another brother. My dad's having his struggles. The neighborhood's having its struggles. And then the most important part, or probably the most influential part, is kind of how the city's response to the epidemic happened. I'm not sure what they could have done, but what did happen was a lot more police enforcement on the small sort of what I call henchmen Everyone in the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood knew who the guys were that brought in the drugs and moved the drugs and moved the prostitutes that were on the corners. Everyone knew who the influencers were, but the police really only ever came in and punished, like the small men. And by the small men, I
Oh,
mean guys that just 5 years ago I was playing freeze tag with in the street, but now they're selling dope and breaking into our house. And that's who got punished, and it never solved the problem. It actually somehow made it worse. And I don't know the behind the doors about how that gets so worse because I haven't been in the system before, but that's what will happen. These guys will get arrested for like selling weed or something, come back 6 months later, damn near hardened criminals. And that was just a lot of my neighborhood. So it wasn't that I was losing friends to death, is that they were getting into the system. I mean, they were getting into, the business, making their money, and then getting caught by the cops and then coming back. Totally different people, like totally different people. So I didn't really have friends at home, neither did my siblings, which is totally different from just a few years, before that, where we go on the streets, play with people, go to other people's homes. So home life turned into like when it's time to go home, we literally go home. We just go in the house and that's it.
because it was not really safe to be outside.
Wasn't safe to be on the streets. My dad still worked a full time job, but while going through his addiction, worked a full time job. But he would leave for days at a time. And if I was outside playing for too long, a lot of the people that he owed money for his drugs would come up and ask me for them. They weren't threatening people. They weren't even scary people. It was just a part of life. Like if I'm gonna be outside today, I probably have to talk to the guys that my dad owes money to for drugs. And there were a few of them, like all the time. So that just kind of cut off outside as well. Just became really introverted. Not really introverted. I was not an introvert, is the thing, but I was inside all the time. I couldn't really interact with people.
It sounds like you went from sort of an idyllic or typical kind of childhood to, something else. But are you saying that recreational drug use was a thing, like the cocaine and the marijuana, sort of accepted, but it didn't blow up into like an all-consuming problem until crack showed up?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that the nature of crack, or how it is, it took away people's ability to regulate? Or
The drug itself is definitely entirely too potent for people to do. Like it does take away from what I've seen in people, not just my dad. It does take away some of your faculties to be able to regulate. But the way the government reacted to it was totally different.
so it sounds like, as far as the city response or the police response, it was more about symbolism over substance. I mean, if they tried to, they could have taken out the source, but instead they were just dealing with symptoms.
They were dealing with symptoms. A lot of the guys people I'm talking about in the neighborhood that were the kingpins, most of them worked for the government. The guy on our block was called Big Red or Dirty Red, and Dirty Red was he was a manager of one of the brake tag stations, and he just sold brake tags from his house. So there were always cops at his
Wait,
house.
he sold what?
Brake tags, so like inspection stickers for your car.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, he sold those. And there
So
were, all these guys did something along the lines of selling something for the government as well.
they sold some sort of license, but he was also like one of the drug distributors.
Yes, he was.
And there were always like police at his house. And
Not in a negative way. Yeah, always police at his house because they go buy whatever they have to buy from him. A lot of people bought, it's just like in Texas, you get your inspection stickers. Imagine just skipping the entire process with like a 10% fee. That's what he offered. So you'd have people from all over the place come and buy these things from him.
is the way you interpret that now as an adult different than the way you interpreted that as a kid? I mean, did you have questions when you were a kid? Like, was it more obvious what should be done? Were you wondering why somebody didn't just fix it?
I was always wondering why someone didn't fix it. And I had tons of questions. And my school time, all of my time, went to thinking about them or reading about them from so many different angles. I wish I could say I think of it differently now, but I really don't. It's almost the older I get and the more I know, the more I almost justify some of my feelings or struggles I had when I was a kid. What seemed crazy back then now seems logical, but in a really twisted way.
So when you're a kid, you kind of can't allow yourself to believe sometimes that something could be wrong, but you wonder a lot about it. Is that
Wondered a whole lot. And it wasn't until almost my later teen years that it really just, it fully clicked. Like, oh, something, this really this entire situation was off, and it did create other questions, I guess you could say, that I've had to answer later in life. But early on, I knew there's something wrong with this guy selling brake tags and also scheduling robbing our house, and, also selling everybody drugs. Something's wrong there.
Yeah. And it would be hard to believe that the law enforcement people didn't know that if you did as a kid.
Yeah, it was really, yeah, that was shocking. I was like, mate, I really believed the police, and I believed that someone could come in and do something, like especially the police. Unfortunately, that got shattered not as young of an age, closer to my teenagers, when we got robbed, and it was Dirty Red's son, and he had robbed everyone on the block over the previous 2 months. And then the cops left Dirty Red's house, came to our house, and said they saw nothing wrong, and they never investigated. And we got the stuff back, some of the stuff back from that guy 2 days later. Like we literally, everyone knows what happened, including the police that showed up to our house. They were just down the street when it happened. It influenced absolutely nothing. I was like, okay, it's nothing's necessarily wrong. Something's working. That's when I got the sniff of something's working, maybe as intended, because this is entirely too orchestrated.
Do you think it's just the bureaucracy, government, racism? All of it? How do you see it now as an adult?
I see it now as an ecosystem, unfortunately. The DEA has created an ecosystem. For the DEA to exist, a problem has to exist.
The DEA?
Drug Enforcement Agency.
Oh, the Drug Enforcement Agency.
There has to be someone to arrest. There has to be someone to get in trouble. And as an adult, I completely see why other countries just say, or even cities in the U.S. now, just say, you know what, we can't keep criminalizing drugs because it's creating these secondary, very disastrous ecosystems. The problem with crack was really how it was penalized, and that it was penalized. Like, we know this drug isn't, like you said, or like we said, it's destroying people's faculties to think. So we should have had, my dad did rehab systems, and they should have just built those in our community. The thing is, they built all the rehab systems for crack way across town, and this is where racism does start getting into. They built them way across town in way more affluent areas of town. So there's stigma going there, there's physical, technical challenges getting there. Just made any sort of solution almost impossible to get to, and harshly penalized people in the neighborhoods for even interacting with the drug instead of doing something that really helps. So as an adult, I can't unsee it like that. I see it happen in other communities and even other countries. It's the criminalization of drug use is what I think would have changed that whole situation and other people's situation going forward.
Yeah, so where people have gotten in over their head and they're sick and dying and their families are crumbling, instead of helping them, we criminalize them.
We criminalize them, and then there's incentive for people, and in our neighborhood it made sense. There weren't a lot of industries, there's not a lot of jobs for a lot of 16-year-old, 17-year-old kids. You need a few bucks for something. It made a lot of sense to just go sell drugs.
It was an easy way to get the money that you needed to eat.
Easy way up is an easy way to eat.
I'm trying to make this make sense in my head. You have to justify your job, but instead of being a real hero and going after the cause, you just continue to pat yourself on the back for going after the lowest rung on the ladder. First time offenders or people that are just maybe trying to get a quick buck to buy food.
Yeah, it was, and from my perspective, it was punishing a lot of good intended, good hearted people. And on the flip side, at this point, I'm going to predominantly white schools. And it's not the classmates or even other parents. It was a lot of the teachers. I can think of, like, in high school, we had a few teachers who would they would talk to the class about the story of what it's like to live in the hood, come just acting like I'm not there, not even knowing my story. And I'm sitting in the classroom and they're telling me stories about what it's like in the hood and what drug dealers are like. And I'm like, man, this is complete crap. Well, everything you're saying, like, you heard on some news story. And there's nothing for me to speak up and say.
So your white teachers in your white school are telling you what it's like to live in the hood with drug dealers.
Yes.
And it's your everyday experience and nobody bothers to ask you.
not even bothering to ask, not even bothering to listen. For like, I was introverted at home. They're like, you're the preppy guy. You go home and there's nothing to say. So that it did create like a dissonance for me there as well. What a trip that was. It was a trip, but yeah, teachers telling you how your life or what they, how they perceive that life to be or what they've heard about it.
There's a source right there in front of them, a source that could give them real information and tell from his heart what his life is like and how this has affected him.
Yes, most people were drastically uninterested. Besides, I think I talked about him last time. And Mr. Hurley, my band director, he's the only person that would, listen to it and actually get it and digest it. Everyone else is just, and I do mean everyone else, just over their head.
Do you remember who was in office at this time?
Bill Clinton.
I was wondering if it coincided with that whole super predator talk, and I don't know if you remember that.
I didn't catch any of that stuff live. I've had to watch a lot of it retroactively. Like I didn't know about his Prison Reform Act until many years after, but it does coincide with when New Orleans got a lot harsher about
Like that 2
drugs.
strikes or 3 strikes, you're out stuff.
Yeah, something bizarre like that with oh man, people getting popped for marijuana, like just smoking it.
Yeah, and then that happens 3 times and you have to go away. And
Yeah, in prison for almost forever. Yeah. But I wasn't that aware of it as a kid. And ironically, I lived in a Democratic neighborhood. Like most people, if you walk around the street and just ask them, I'm voting whatever, I'm voting liberal, I'm voting Democrat. Whereas, they've complained about we have community issues around drugs, but the very president we're voting for is the one bringing forth like the most damaging policies.
yeah, the first Black president had a hand in destroying your Black neighborhood.
Yeah, I was always tripped out why people call this guy the first Black president. I don't. He knows nothing but money.
A white guy from what, Arkansas?
So yeah.
Yeah.
So and to bring it back to me, what was happening to me during that time, I was way less engaged in school. Like you said, I was thinking about all these different situations. I was just really curious. I got really curious about the rest of the world. Like, certainly this can't be everywhere. I see other people going home to different neighborhoods. Not that they don't have problems, but they have way different problems. So I just had no focus on school, which meant I had no focus on what kind of job I would have. My money focus was mostly lost during those years. I had a real detachment from, I guess, mainstream American reality.
Were you like in survival mode?
Definitely. That preteen era is really where I don't know what I did to like break it down because at that point I realized I was going to school for years and not remembering what I did or happened on the weekends. Not that it was beat or anyone in my house, was touched. It was just I'm at
You
home for 2 days and whatever.
Let me just say, you were living in trauma. I mean, nobody had to beat you. Your whole reality is crumbling. Your mother is taking you in as a confidant. Your dad has abdicated his throne. The other authorities, the police, are very obviously going after the wrong problem. And you're, as a kid and as a smart kid, can understand and see what's going on. And it's like the world has gone crazy and you're not equipped to deal with it. And that's trauma.
Hmm.
You live in it. You live in it every day.
Living it every day, and as an adult, I do reflect on that, but it's hard to process all the way back that far. That's why I was saying, and thank you for saying that, because I can't unpack that stuff for myself. But that's what it was. I was living trauma every weekend, and then showing up at school like,
You're putting a smile on your face and hearing about how horrible the hood is.
yep, exactly. There's a story in eighth grade. It was the end of middle school, and my middle school was a private school, but it was like mixed. It was mixed. There was mixed people. No one had seen our house. This is eighth grade. This is like 5 years into this crack cocaine epidemic. So our house was, oh man, it was thrashed. And so no one had seen our house. Like no one came to our house at all. And this guy from school and his little sister had to come with us one day. And I remember walking them in our house and them seeing it. And I've never seen anyone so shocked at anything in their entire lives. And they went to school, and of course, they told other people about it. It didn't make a big scene. It really didn't. I think most people understood. My dad was coaching flag football for the school, and he showed up smelling like weed or drunk or whatever. So people kind of knew, and they really didn't give me a hard time about it. It really wasn't a thing. But what I did take away was like, man, I thought we were living in some abnormal, weird wasteland, and the way those people looked, the way they looked on their face just confirmed it. And that was that's a moment I can remember like jolting me out of like, I guess it not jolting me out of the trauma, it just jolted me to acknowledge like something's totally different, and I gotta like start. I don't know, I gotta get that out or something. But that was a
Yeah.
jolting moment.
That's really interesting. It's like, as hard as that probably was, it validated to you that this is crazy. Their
I,
response to your life and how you were living.
I needed it so bad at that time too. I needed it so bad because like it's not like our grandparents didn't know what was happening. In fact, my dad's mother was even kind of helping him stay in that predicament in so many ways. But like, goodness, man, someone make sense to me. Someone come home. Someone else come in his house and say this is absolutely ridiculous. And that finally happened, and it was a probably a saving moment in some way.
That's really powerful. The greatest gifts come in the ugliest packages. And I'm sure as a kid, you were resistant to wanting someone to see, but their seeing set you free in a
Hmm.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. And comparing it with my siblings, because this whole time I have two younger siblings, they just weren't in the know about as much. My mom did not make them confidants.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this as young adults now. They just knew way different world. They grew up in a different world. But my sister will still say to this day, because my parents kept some of those habits from them. They had trauma too, and they kept some of those traumatic habits till my dad passed last year. And you go to their house, and some of it looked like the same, junky, like crazy, crazy. And my sister always jokes like, "Why do you keep bringing people to our house? Why the parents keep the house like this?" And I think that was my first disassociation. And just right now, live in this conversation, I'm realizing that I still did. Like once that person saw our house like that, I was like, I'm not going to live with this shame anymore because I'm not creating this situation. So I did bring my friends or my parents until all the way until now. I'll bring people to my parents' house no matter what shape it's in. It's almost like a joke to them, and then my mom will, we'll have a talk about it. She'll clean up or something. But it's I would say that probably ended that phase. Really, now that I think about it, I took some of that responsibility off my plate. I was like, damn it, I'm a teenager. Like, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have people around. I'm gonna not associate with this as much because I'm not creating it.
Yeah, that is such a powerful moment when you can say, this is not mine. I didn't cause this. I didn't make this. I'm not going to be this. And then that's where that survivor kicks in. When you decided, I'm not going to have this kind of life. I'm going to have a different sort of life.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, does that sound like the middle part of the story?
I think it fills in some gaps for sure. Yeah. Because, last time when I said, how did you not? You said your sister and mother told you that they were surprised you didn't become like a drug dealer. And you said, I don't take that much credit for it. It's like you couldn't quite remember. But I think this kind of helps. Maybe even you see that it was sort of a conscious decision that you thought, no, I'm not going to do this.
It really was a conscious decision at some point. I had a lot of opportunities to go that route in high school. What they didn't tell you was in private high school, the drug situation is just as bad. It's just not punished the same way or regarded the same way. So I did make an active choice. I was around kids at that time, Vietnamese mafia kids who made a lot of money selling drugs in these private high schools. And I definitely had every opportunity to go ahead and make that money with them. But I made that choice on both fronts, at home and at school. Very conscious, like active choices. I was around drugs one way or another, and I was like, I'll just be around it. I'm not going to be about it though. And I was kind of like that. A both stinging and completely relieving moment was one of the same teachers in high school was telling a story of Tupac, and he was like, Tupac's friends weren't his friends. They were all drug dealers, so he was bad. I'm like, yeah, damn, dude. Listen, I'm friends with the drugs, people that sell drugs at this school, and I know the people around my home who sell drugs. And I'm like Tupac. They don't pressure me to do any of this stuff. It's just an open invitation. They actually respect that I'm not a part of it, and that I don't fake it around them.
Yeah.
So there was actually, I did find a lot of empowerment in that choice.
It was a power pose, like a superhero.
It was a lot of attempts from a lot of ways to get Ojai Turk involved with drugs somehow. I wasn't about to let that happen. I wasn't about to let that happen. I didn't like any angle of it. I didn't want to be a cop. I didn't want to be a federal agent. I didn't want to be a neighborhood dealer, and I didn't want to be hooked. And so I wasn't going to be. So thank you. Yeah, that was how did I not become a drug addict? Focusing on helping people. I was like, how can I think my brain really shifted to what would it take to just fix this situation? Just what's the fix? Because complaining definitely that had long been gone out through prayer, through every possible channel. I was like, what would it take for me to fix this thing? There's got to be some weird reason I'm perceiving it this way as well. There's got to be something there. I did catch on to that spark. Preteens, early teen years.
Yeah. I really appreciate you telling me the story. It's very enlightening and helpful to see it from your perspective.
Thank you for asking and listening. That's a lot of unpacking. I don't get a chance to really tell it.
I know we're probably about at our time, but maybe just to kind of set up for future, if you're interested or think it's a good direction. You brought up so many things, so many trailheads in this episode. Like there's the institutional or systemic type racism that we kind of allow unconsciously. It seems like sometimes we're not willing to face it. And then there's that whole thing that's my personal pet peeve is, people learning about racism from other white people and feeling like they kind of have a grasp on it and not really considering all the nuances.
Yes. Both of those are great trailheads to stem off of, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I would just like to have some conversations where we can just tell the truth, even if it's ugly, open and honest conversations, and to agree and disagree, and maybe even bring in other people.
I think that'd be great if more people could share their lived experience with institutional racism, systemic racism. I think that's what it'll take. I think that, yeah, it is what we need. Not I think. It's what we need. People need to sit across from each other and hear some uncomfortable stories.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing yours today. It really means a lot.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to encourage anybody who's listening, if you do have a story that you'd like to tell, or you have a question or a comment, there is a place on my website, angelaabide.com, for comments, and you can leave it there, and maybe we'll pick it up and talk about it on the podcast. Jai, do you have anything else before we sign off today?
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and please keep tuning in.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Angela.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.